The clatter of silverware usually defines a Tuesday night at the Gilded Lily, but when Dante Moretti walked in, the world went mute. He didn't just command the room. He owned the air inside it. For years, the Chicago underworld whispered that if the Great Wolf spoke to you in Italian, you were already a dead man. So when he leaned over his table and hissed a chilling command in a sharp Sicilian dialect, his men froze. The air turned to ice. But then the unthinkable happened. A waitress, holding nothing but a tray of espresso, looked him dead in the eye and answered back in his own tongue. In that moment, the power shifted. The room didn't just go silent. It held its breath for the explosion. The shift started like any other at the Gilded Lily. The restaurant was a relic of old-world Chicago. Velvet booths, dim amber lighting, and the kind of heavy oak-paneled walls that seemed to absorb secrets. Sienna Hayes adjusted her apron for the 10th time that hour. Her feet ached in her sensible black flats, a sharp contrast to the high society women dripping in Cartier who frequented the Gold Coast establishment. Sienna was a ghost in plain sight. To the patrons, she was just the help. To her manager, Mr. Henderson, she was the most reliable worker he had, mostly because she never complained and never ever joined in the staff gossip. But Sienna had a secret of her own, one that lived in the dusty journals of her grandmother, back in a small village outside of Palermo. She didn't just speak Italian. She spoke the old codes, the dialects of the men who built empires on blood. At 8:15 p.m., the heavy brass doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante Moretti didn't walk. He prowled. He was followed by 4 men, including his brother Lorenzo, and a scarred enforcer everyone in the city knew as the Hatchet Sullivan. Dante was younger than the newspapers suggested, perhaps in his early 30s, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. He took the center booth, the one that was always reserved even when the restaurant was empty. The entire staff retreated. Even Henderson, usually a blustering tyrant, suddenly found something very important to do in the walk-in freezer. "Sienna," Henderson hissed from the shadows of the kitchen door. "Table 4. Don't look them in the eye. Don't ask questions. Just pour the wine and get out." Sienna took a steadying breath. She grabbed a bottle of 1945 Romane Conti and a set of leaded crystal glasses. As she approached the table, the air grew thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and something metallic, like the smell of a storm before it breaks. Dante was leaning forward, his hands clasped on the white linen. He wasn't looking at the menu. He was looking at Lorenzo. His voice was low, a rhythmic growl that barely carried over the soft jazz playing in the background. But he wasn't speaking English. "Il traditore siede alla nostra tavola, Lorenzo," Dante murmured. "The traitor sits at our table." Lorenzo's hand twitched toward his jacket. "Sei sicuro, Dante?" "Sempre. Stanotte lo portiamo al molo. Non voglio resti. Voglio che la sua famiglia guardi l'acqua e non veda nulla. Tonight, we take him to the pier. I want no remains. I want his family to look at the water and see nothing." The rest of the men at the table went rigid. They assumed the waitress was just a prop, a piece of furniture that moved and poured wine. They didn't know that Sienna's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew exactly which pier they were talking about. It was the one near the old Sullivan and Sons warehouse, a place her own father had disappeared from 12 years ago. As she leaned in to pour Dante's wine, her hand didn't shake. But as the dark red liquid hit the glass, she saw a flicker of movement. Sullivan was sliding a folded note toward Lorenzo, a note that bore the seal of the Valenti family, the Moretti's biggest rivals. Dante saw it too, his eyes turned to flint. He spoke again, his voice dropping to a terrifying, melodic whisper. "Ci tocca il mio pane, muore di fame, e chi mi tradisce, finisce nel cemento. He who touches my bread dies of hunger, and he who betrays me ends up in cement." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of a death sentence. Sienna set the bottle down. She should have walked away. She should have gone back to the kitchen and pretended she was just a waitress from the South Side who barely passed high school Spanish. Instead, she looked directly at Dante Moretti. She didn't flinch. Ma il cemento è freddo, Signor Moretti, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. E I morti non possono dirvi dove hanno nascosto I soldi che vi hanno rubato. But the cement is cold, Mr. Moretti, and the dead cannot tell you where they hid the money they stole from you. The sound of a fork hitting a plate echoed like a gunshot. Dante's head snapped up, his eyes locked onto hers, burning with a mixture of shock and lethal curiosity. Sullivan reached for his waistband, but Dante raised a single scarred hand. He didn't take his eyes off Sienna. The entire restaurant went bone still. The socialites at the neighboring tables froze mid-sip. The pianist stopped playing. For the first time in his life, Dante Moretti had been checked by a girl holding a wine opener. "Where?" Dante said, his English perfect and terrifyingly smooth. "Did a girl like you learn to speak the language of my ghosts?" Sienna didn't back down. "My grandmother taught me that if you're going to kill a man, you should at least make sure he's finished his wine first. It's bad luck to waste a good vintage on a ghost." Dante leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face, a smile that didn't reach his cold, dark eyes. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit," he commanded. "I have tables to serve, sir," Sienna replied. "Sit," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, "or the next thing you serve will be an apology to God." Sienna pulled out the chair and sat. The world outside the Gilded Lily continued to turn, but inside, the life she knew was over. She had just stepped into the lion's den, and the lion was hungry for answers. The silence in the Gilded Lily was so heavy it felt physical. Every eye in the restaurant was pinned on the girl in the stained apron sitting across from the most feared man in Chicago. Dante Moretti didn't blink. He watched Sienna with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a new, dangerous specimen. "Leave us," Dante said, his voice a low vibration. His men didn't hesitate. Lorenzo and the hatchet stood up, their chairs scraping against the marble floor like a funeral dirge. They moved to the perimeter, forming a human wall that ensured no one, not even the manager, could hear what was about to be said. "What is your name?" Dante asked. "Sienna," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "Sienna Hayes." Dante leaned forward, the candlelight catching the sharp edge of his jawline. "Hayes, a generic name, a mask. But your accent, Sienna, that isn't from a textbook. That is the dialect of the Castellamare del Golfo. It's the language of the men of honor, who don't exist anymore. How does a waitress in a cheap apron speak the tongue of my ancestors?" Sienna felt the cold sweat prickling at her hairline. She knew she had to give him a piece of the truth to keep him from taking her life. "My grandmother, Sophia Morelli, came over in 74. She didn't want me to forget where we came from. She said the English language was for business, but Italian was for the soul." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Morelli? From the hills near Palermo?" "Yes." Dante's hand, adorned with a heavy gold signet ring, tapped rhythmically on the table. "Your grandmother was a wise woman, but she forgot to teach you one thing. In my world, knowing too much is a terminal illness. You just told me that my own captain is planning to sell me out to the Valenti family. If you're lying, I'll have your tongue. If you're right, I have to wonder why a waitress is looking out for the great wolf." "I'm not looking out for you," Sienna countered, a spark of defiance lighting up her dark eyes. "I just hate to see a good vintage wasted on a dead man. And I know that note Sullivan passed wasn't a menu. It had the Blackstone Heights coordinates on it. That's Valenti territory." Dante went bone still. The mention of Blackstone Heights was the confirmation he needed. He stood up abruptly, reaching into his charcoal suit jacket. For a terrifying second, Sienna thought he was reaching for a suppressed Beretta. Instead, he pulled out a stack of $100 bills and dropped them on the table, enough to buy the restaurant. "You're coming with me," he commanded. "I have a shift to finish." "Sienna," he said, stepping closer until she could smell the expensive sandalwood and the faint metallic scent of gun oil. "You just crossed a line. You aren't a waitress anymore. You're a witness. And in my world, witnesses either become property or they become ghosts. Choose. He didn't wait for an answer. He gripped her elbow, not painfully, but with an iron certainty, and led her towards the back exit. Outside, a blacked-out Cadillac Escalade was idling in the rain-slicked alley. As they drove through the neon-lit streets of Chicago, passing the dark silhouette of the Willis Tower, the atmosphere inside the SUV was suffocating. Dante sat in the back with Sienna, while Sullivan drove and Lorenzo sat in the passenger seat, his hand never leaving his holster. "Where are we going?" Sienna asked, looking out at the blurring lights of the Dan Ryan Expressway. "To verify your story," Dante said, "and to see if you're worth the trouble of keeping alive." They pulled up to a nondescript brownstone in Lincoln Park. To the neighbors, it was just another multi-million-dollar renovation. To the Moretti family, it was a safe house, a place where the walls were reinforced with lead and the basement held secrets that never saw the light of day. Inside, Dante led her to a private study filled with leather-bound books and a massive mahogany desk. He walked to a painting on the wall, a moody landscape of the Sicilian coast, and swung it open to reveal a hidden safe. He pulled out a weathered, leather-bound ledger. "My father, Vittorio Moretti, kept records of everyone who owed him," Dante explained, tossing the book onto the desk. "He died 12 years ago. He was betrayed by someone close to him, a man named Thomas Hayes." Sienna felt the air leave her lungs. Her father's name. The name she had spent a decade trying to scrub from her identity. "My father wasn't a criminal," she whispered, though the lie tasted like ash. "Your father was the best accountant the Chicago outfit ever had," Dante corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He disappeared with $30 million of my family's money. He left his wife and daughter behind to face the consequences. We searched for him for a decade. We thought the trail was cold, until a girl with his eyes and a Morelli's tongue started serving me wine at a steakhouse." Sienna backed away, her heart hammering. "I don't know where he is. I haven't seen him since I was 10 years old. I'm just a waitress, Dante. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Pilsen. I take the L train every morning. Does that look like I have $30 million? Dante stepped into her space, his presence overwhelming. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. It was a gesture that could have been tender if it wasn't so predatory. "Maybe you don't have the money," he murmured. "But you have the ledger in your head. You understood the dialect. You knew the coordinates. You're not just Sophia Morelli's granddaughter. You're Thomas Hayes' legacy. And tonight, you're going to help me find the man who killed my father. And if I refuse—" Dante leaned down, his lips inches from her ear. "Then the silence in that restaurant tonight? It will be the last thing you ever hear." Just then, the door burst open. Sullivan rushed in, his face pale. "Dante, we've got a problem. The Valentis just hit the warehouse on 22nd Street. They aren't looking for the shipment. They're looking for her." Dante looked at Sienna, a dark realization dawning in his eyes. "They knew you were there. They've been watching the Lily for weeks." The first twist had landed. Sienna wasn't just a random waitress who happened to speak Italian. She was the bait in a much larger game, and the trap had just snapped shut. The sound of shattering glass from the floor below echoed through the Lincoln Park brownstone. Dante didn't flinch. He moved with the practiced grace of a predator who had spent his life in the crosshairs. He grabbed Sienna by the waist, hauling her behind the heavy mahogany desk, just as a spray of bullets shredded the leather-bound books she had been admiring moments ago. "Sullivan! Lorenzo! Bottleneck the stairs!" Dante roared. The room smelled of cordite and expensive wood dust. Sienna pressed her back against the desk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "They're here for me. Why would the Valentis want a waitress?" Dante checked the magazine of his chrome Beretta 92 FS, because if you're Thomas Hayes' daughter, you're not just a waitress. You're a walking bank vault. "My father's 30 million didn't just vanish. It was encrypted. And your father always said the key was in the blood." Another volley of gunfire erupted. Sienna saw the painting of the Sicilian coast fall from the wall, riddled with holes. She looked at the desk, her father's old desk, sold to the Morettis after his disappearance. She noticed a small, familiar scratch near the bottom drawer, a carving of a lily, the same one her father used to draw on her lunch bags. "Dante," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The desk. Look at the carving." "Not now, Sienna. Look at it. My father didn't leave the money in a bank. He left it in the furniture." Dante glanced down. He saw the tiny, etched lily. Outside the door, the screaming of men and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of tactical shotguns grew closer. He reached down, his fingers finding a hidden pressure point within the carving. With a mechanical click, a small compartment popped open near the floorboards. Inside wasn't a stack of cash. It was an old BlackBerry 7230 and a silver thumb drive. "Go! Out the back!" Lorenzo yelled from the hallway, his suit jacket soaked in blood. "They've got the perimeter blocked, but the cellar leads to the old coal tunnels." Dante grabbed the drive and the phone, shoving them into his pocket. He grabbed Sienna's hand, pulling her toward a narrow servants' staircase. They descended into the darkness of the basement, the sound of the battle fading into a dull roar above them. The air in the tunnels was thick with the smell of damp earth and Chicago history. As they ran, the flashlight on Dante's phone illuminated the brick walls. "Why are you helping me?" Sienna panted, her lungs burning. "You think I'm the daughter of a thief." Dante stopped, spinning her around to face him. The shadows made his features look like they were carved from granite. "I thought your father stole from us. But looking at that drive, and looking at you, I'm starting to think he was protecting it. The Valentis didn't just kill my father, Sienna. They framed yours. And they've been waiting 12 years for you to get old enough to remember the key." Suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on Dante's chest. "Don't move, Don Moretti," a voice sneered from the darkness ahead. Out of the shadows stepped Salvatore Valenti, the youngest and most volatile of the Valenti brothers. He was holding a submachine gun, flanked by 2 men. "The waitress comes with us," Salvatore said, his eyes roaming over Sienna with a sickening hunger. "She has the code. Her father was a genius. He encoded the accounts to her biometric signature. We don't need the drive. We just need her eyes and her voice." Sienna felt a cold realization wash over her. The Italian lessons her grandmother gave her. The specific way she was taught to recite old Sicilian poetry. It wasn't just culture. It was a voice recognition password. Dante stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "You'll have to kill me first, Sal." "That was the plan, anyway," Salvatore laughed. But Sienna saw something Salvatore didn't. Behind the Valenti men, an old steam pipe was hissing violently. She remembered what her father, the accountant, used to tell her. "In every system there is a pressure point. You just have to find it." "Wait!" Sienna cried out in Italian, her voice echoing with a specific melodic frequency, the one her grandmother had drilled into her. "La chiave nella cenere." The key is in the ashes. The voice-activated system in the old safe-house tunnels, tied to the Moretti family's legacy, recognized the frequency of the Hayes signature. A security vent directly above the Valenti men slammed shut, and a burst of high-pressure fire suppression gas exploded into the tunnel. The white fog blinded them instantly. "Run!" Sienna screamed. Dante didn't need to be told twice. He fired 2 shots into the fog to keep them down, grabbed Sienna, and hauled her through a heavy iron door that led out into the rain of a dark alleyway behind Clark Street. They collapsed against a brick wall, drenched and shivering. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, leaving a raw, pulsing electricity between them. Dante looked at her, his breathing heavy. He saw the waitress from the steakhouse, but he also saw the daughter of the man who had held his family's fate in his hands. "You saved my life," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "I saved my own," Sienna countered, though she didn't pull away when he reached out to wipe a smudge of soot from her cheek. "No," Dante whispered, stepping closer until their foreheads touched. "You just declared war. You spoke the password. They know you have the key now. You can't go back to the Gilded Lily, Sienna. You can't go back to your apartment." "Then where do I go?" Dante's eyes darkened, a flash of possessiveness crossing his face. "You stay with me, in the lion's den." Because the only thing more dangerous than the Valentis right now is what happens if I let you out of my sight. The twist? As Dante led her to a waiting car, Sienna felt the silver thumb drive in her own pocket. She had lifted it from him during the chaos in the tunnel. She didn't just have the voice, she had the data. The waitress wasn't just a witness, she was the new player king. The Moretti penthouse atop the heritage at Millennium Park was a fortress of glass and steel. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Chicago looked like a jewel box, but to Sienna, the sparkling lights felt like the bars of a very expensive cage. Dante paced the length of the living room, his silk shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the edge of a tattoo on his collarbone. A wolf circling a rose. He was on the phone, his voice a low, lethal hum as he barked orders to Lorenzo about reinforcing the docks. Sienna sat on the edge of a white leather sofa, her damp waitress uniform replaced by a silk robe Dante had commanded his staff to find for her. She felt the weight of the silver thumb drive hidden in the pocket of the robe. She had stolen it from a man who killed for a living, and yet the fear was being slowly eclipsed by a strange, electric tension. Dante hung up the phone and turned to her. The moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face. "My men are scouring the city. Salvatore Valenti has gone to ground, but he won't stay quiet for long. He knows you're the only way to unlock the Hayes accounts." "And what happens when you unlock them, Dante?" Sienna asked, her voice steady. "Do I get my life back? Or am I just a liability you'll have to manage?" Dante walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug. He stopped just inches away, the scent of sandalwood and rain-drenched asphalt surrounding her. "Manage? Sienna, you're the first person in 5 years to speak to me without trembling. You saved my life in those tunnels. In my world, that makes you more than a liability. It makes you a queen." He reached out, his fingers grazing the silk of her robe, dangerously close to the pocket where the drive was hidden. Sienna's heart thundered. "I need the drive, Sienna," he whispered. "I know you have it." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Sienna didn't blink. "I don't know what you're talking about." Dante let out a short, dry laugh. "You're good. You're very good. But I noticed the weight of your pocket the moment we got in the car. You're a thief's daughter, after all. It's in your blood." Sienna stood up, her eyes flashing. "My father wasn't a thief. He was a man trying to survive people like you. He saw what the Valentis were doing, how they were using your family's money to fund human trafficking in the port of Chicago. He didn't steal that money, Dante. He sequestered it. He froze it so nobody could use it for blood." Dante's expression hardened. "Human trafficking. My family deals in luxury goods, construction, and protection. We don't touch that filth." "Then you haven't been looking at your own ledgers," Sienna countered. She pulled the drive from her pocket and held it out. "Check it. If I'm lying, you can hand me over to Salvatore right now, but if I'm right, then your father didn't die because of a betrayal. He died because he was trying to stop the Valentis from turning the Moretti Empire into a slaughterhouse." Dante snatched the drive, his jaw tight. He crossed to a high-end workstation and slammed the drive into the port. A holographic screen flickered to life, demanding a 128-bit encryption key. "The voice," Dante commanded. Sienna stepped forward. She thought of her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of garlic and old paper, and the rhythmic chanting of the poems. She leaned towards the microphone. "Sotto l'ombra del leone, la verità riposa nel silenzio," she recited. "Under the shadow of the lion, the truth rests in silence." The screen turned green. Files began to cascade down the monitor. Spreadsheets, shipping manifests, and scanned photos of handwritten notes from Vittorio Moretti. As Dante scrolled, his face went pale. Sienna was right. The Valenti family hadn't just been rivals. They had been parasites, using the Moretti shipping lanes to move more than just contraband. They were moving people, and the signatures authorizing the shipments weren't just Valentis. One signature stood out, dated only a week before Dante's father was murdered. Lorenzo Moretti. "No," Dante whispered, the word sounding like a death rattle. My brother. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The first twist was a fracture, but this was a total collapse. Dante's own blood had been the architect of his father's downfall. Suddenly the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving the room in an eerie, tomb-like silence. "Dante," Sienna whispered, reaching for him in the dark. "Stay down," he hissed, pulling his weapon. Through the massive glass windows, they saw the red glowing eyes of several drones hovering just outside the balcony. A second later, the glass didn't just break. It exploded inward as a flashbang grenade blinded them both. Sienna felt a pair of rough hands grab her. She tried to scream, but a heavy cloth harness was pressed against her mouth. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was Dante, struggling against 3 masked men, his eyes locked onto hers with a desperate, feral roar. The lion's den had been breached from the inside. The wreckage of the penthouse was a symphony of glass and failure. Dante Moretti sat on the floor, his back against the cold marble of the kitchen island, pressing a blood-soaked rag to a shallow graze on his temple. The silence was gone, replaced by the distant, wailing sirens of the Chicago Police Department, likely called by neighbors who had heard the explosion. "Boss, we have to move. The blue lights will be here in 3 minutes," a gravelly voice commanded. Dante looked up to see the hatchet Sullivan standing over him. The enforcer's face was a mask of grim determination, his knuckles split and bleeding. In his hand, he held a discarded Valenti tactical mask. "They took her, Sullivan," Dante rasped, his voice cracking with a vulnerability he hadn't felt since his father's funeral. "My own brother handed her to them on a silver platter." "Lorenzo was always greedy, Dante. But he's also sloppy," Sullivan said, hauling Dante to his feet. "He didn't take her to the Valenti compound in O'Hare. That's too high profile. He took her to the old Calumet River shipyards. I tracked the transponder on the SUV before they jammed it." Dante's eyes flared with a lethal, cold fire. "Assemble the men. No, not all of them. Only the ones whose fathers served mine. I don't know who else Lorenzo has poisoned." 30 miles south, the air smelled of rust and stagnant water. Sienna Hayes was tied to a rusted industrial chair in the center of a cavernous warehouse. Above her, the moon peered through holes in the corrugated steel roof like a judging eye. Lorenzo Moretti stood before her, sipping from a flask. He looked like Dante, but the features were warped, soft where Dante's were sharp, arrogant where Dante's were commanding. Beside him stood Salvatore Valenti, looking bored as he toyed with a butterfly knife. "The code, Sienna," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing. "The thumb drive we took from the penthouse is useless without the second half. My father's ledger mentioned a pulse, a biometric rhythm. It's not just your voice, it's your heart rate. You have to be under a specific level of stress to unlock the final tier of the accounts." Sienna spat a mouthful of blood onto his polished Italian loafers. "You're a coward, Lorenzo. You killed your own father because you couldn't live up to his shadow." Lorenzo's face contorted in rage. He stepped forward to strike her, but Salvatore caught his arm. "Don't bruise the merchandise," Salvatore sneered. "If her heart rate spikes too high or drops too low, the encryption wipes the 30 million. We need her calm, or at least we need her focused." "I'll never give it to you," Sienna whispered. "You will," Lorenzo said, a cruel smile touching his lips. He pulled a grainy, weathered photograph from his pocket. It showed a younger Sienna at a park, holding the hand of a man whose face was obscured by shadow. "Because your father isn't dead, Sienna. Thomas Hayes is alive, and we have him in a cell 3 doors down." Sienna felt the world tilt. The lie she had lived for 12 years, the grief she had processed, was suddenly ripped open. "You're lying." "Is he?" A voice called out from the darkness of the warehouse rafters. Crack! A sniper round shattered the flask in Lorenzo's hand. The warehouse doors didn't just open, they were breached by a blacked-out armored truck. Dante Moretti stepped out of the driver's side before the vehicle had even stopped moving. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He was in tactical black, a submachine gun slung over his shoulder, looking every bit the warlord he was born to be. "Lorenzo!" Dante's voice boomed, vibrating through the metal structure. "Step away from her, and I might let you live long enough to see a courtroom. Who you brought a handful of relics, Dante, Lorenzo yelled back, diving behind a stack of shipping crates as his own gunmen opened fire. The Valentis have the whole district locked down. The warehouse erupted into a chaotic symphony of muzzle flashes and screaming metal. Sullivan moved like a whirlwind of violence, clearing the left flank while Dante pushed towards the center. Sienna struggled against her bonds. She saw Salvatore Valenti leveling his weapon at Dante's chest. Without thinking, she threw her weight to the side, toppling her chair and screaming in the specific Sicilian cadence she used for the code, not for the money, but to trigger the warehouse's ancient automated fire suppression system she had noticed earlier. Sangue chiama sangue. Blood calls blood. The emergency sirens blared, and a deluge of chemical foam poured from the ceiling, creating a blinding white fog. In the confusion, Dante reached her. He sliced through her zip ties with a combat knife, pulling her into a protective embrace. "I've got you," he breathed against her hair. "My father," she gasped. "Dante, they said my father is here." Dante looked toward the back of the warehouse, where Lorenzo was frantically trying to open a heavy steel door. "Stay behind me," Dante commanded. They reached the door just as Lorenzo managed to swing it open, but the man inside wasn't a prisoner. The man sitting calmly in the small, lit room was older, his hair white, wearing a suit that cost more than the warehouse itself. He was holding a glass of scotch and looking at a bank of monitors that displayed every move the Morettis and Valentis had made that night. "Hello, Sienna," the man said. "Hello, Dante. You're both right on time." Sienna froze. "Dad?" Thomas Hayes stood up, a cold, calculating smile on his face. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like the architect. 30 million? Thomas laughed, glancing at the ledger on the table. "That was just the bait to get the two of you in the same room. We have much bigger things to discuss than a few shipping lanes." The second major twist had arrived. Sienna's father hadn't been framed. He had been the one pulling the strings of both families for over a decade, waiting for his daughter to become the perfect bridge to the Moretti throne. The air in the small, climate-controlled office was a stark contrast to the humid, chemical-choked air of the warehouse. Here, the hum of servers and the soft clink of ice in Thomas Hayes's glass were the only sounds. Sienna stood frozen, her eyes darting between the father she had mourned for 12 years and the man she had just saved. Dante's grip on his submachine gun didn't loosen, but his knuckles were white. "Dad?" Sienna's voice was a fragile thread. You were here the whole time. You let Mum die thinking you were a traitor. You let me work double shifts at a steakhouse just to pay rent while you sat in a throne of monitors?" Thomas Hayes sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. "I didn't let your mother die, Sienna. I kept you both safe by being a ghost. If the Morettis or the Valentis knew I was alive, they would have used you as leverage years ago. I needed you to grow up. I needed you to become someone who could handle the weight of what I've built." "What you've built," Dante growled, stepping forward. His eyes were predatory. "You've built a graveyard, Hayes. You played my father. You played the Valentis. And you played me." Thomas smiled, and it was a cold, clinical expression that made Sienna's skin crawl. "I didn't play you, Dante. I curated you. I knew Lorenzo was weak, a parasite. I knew Salvatore Valenti was a rabid dog. But you had the Moretti iron and a soul that hadn't been completely eroded. You were the only one capable of protecting the key." "E chi è la chiave, Papa?" Sienna whispered, her Italian sharp and accusing. "And who is the key, Father?" "You are, tesoro mio," Thomas replied, "but not just for the money. The Hayes accounts aren't just cash. They are the digital fingerprints of every politician, judge, and dock official in the Midwest. Whoever holds your hand, Sienna, holds the keys to the kingdom." Suddenly the monitors behind Thomas flickered. They showed Lorenzo and Salvatore regrouping in the warehouse, their remaining men surrounding the office. They were arming themselves with C4. They didn't care about the records anymore. They wanted to erase the evidence. "We have 3 minutes before they blow this structure," Thomas said, checking his watch. "Dante, you have a choice. You can take Sienna and the drive and try to fight your way out. You'll likely die, and she'll be taken by the Valentis. Or you sign the unification agreement on that tablet." Dante glanced at the tablet. It was a merger. The Moretti family would absorb the Valenti territory, backed by the Hayes data, but the board of directors would be chaired by Thomas Hayes. Dante would be the face. Thomas would be the brain. "And if I sign?" Dante asked. "Then the accident that's about to happen to Lorenzo and Salvatore becomes reality." "My security team is already in position. You and Sienna walk out of here as the new king and queen of Chicago. No more running. No more waitressing." Dante looked at Sienna. For the first time, the great wolf looked uncertain. He saw the girl who had answered him in Italian, the girl who had a fire in her that no Mafia contract could extinguish. "Sienna," Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rasp, "is this what you want? To rule a city built on your father's lies?" Sienna looked at her father. She saw the man who had abandoned her, the man who was now offering her a crown made of thorns. Then she looked at the silver thumb drive she still held, the one she had stolen, returned, and survived for. "My father taught me that every system has a pressure point," Sienna said, her voice turning cold as ice. She didn't look at the tablet. Instead, she looked at the monitors. She saw Lorenzo placing a charge on the server room door. "Ma mi ha anche insegnato a non fidarmi mai di un uomo che beve da solo," she added. "But he also taught me never to trust a man who drinks alone." With a lightning-fast movement, Sienna didn't grab the tablet. She grabbed Dante's spare combat knife from his tactical vest and slammed it, not into her father, but into the central server hub on the desk. The screens went black. A high-pitched squeal erupted from the speakers. "What have you done?" Thomas roared, his calm facade shattering. "I didn't just break the encryption, Dad," Sienna said, a dark smile playing on her lips. "I triggered the dead man switch you told me about when I was 6. The one that sends the entire ledger, every name, every bribe, every crime, directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in D.C. If we go down, we all go down. The kingdom is gone." The warehouse shook. Lorenzo had detonated the first charge. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. "Dante, now!" Sienna screamed. Dante didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sienna, throwing her over his shoulder as he kicked through the glass partition of the office. They weren't heading for the front door. That was a kill zone. They were heading for the dry dock, where a high-speed transport boat was waiting in the shadows. Behind them, they heard the sounds of the Valentis breaking into the office. They heard the frantic shouting of Lorenzo and the cold, panicked commands of Thomas Hayes as he tried to save his vanishing empire. Dante and Sienna hit the water level just as the warehouse began to collapse in a series of secondary explosions. The sky turned orange, reflecting off the oily surface of the Calumet River. Dante tossed Sienna into the boat and jumped in after her, firing the engines. As they tore away from the burning shipyard, the silhouette of the city loomed ahead, no longer a jewel box, but a battlefield. Sienna huddled in the back of the boat, drenched and shivering. Dante steered with one hand, the other reaching back to find hers. "You burned it all," he said, the wind whipping his hair. "You realize that, right? You're not a billionaire anymore. You're a fugitive." "I was a waitress, making $10 an hour plus tips, Dante." Sienna laughed, though there were tears in her eyes. "I've been a fugitive my whole life. At least now I know who the ghosts are." Dante pulled the boat toward a hidden cove near Museum Campus. He cut the engines, letting them drift in the shadow of the Adler Planetarium. The silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of a restaurant or a grave. It was the silence of a new beginning. "The FBI will be at the Moretti estate by dawn," Dante said, looking at her. "Lorenzo and the Valentis are either dead or headed to a supermax. And your father will never stop looking for us." "Let him look," Sienna said, stepping toward him. She reached up, cupping the face of the Mafia boss who had lost everything to save her. He spoke the language, Dante, but he forgot how to listen. Dante leaned down, his lips brushing hers in the dark. "What now, Sienna?" "Now," she whispered, "we go to the only place they'll never look for a Mafia king and a ghost." The twist? As the sun began to rise over Lake Michigan, Sienna's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. "Check the third account, Sienna. The one your mother opened in Zurich. I didn't leave you with nothing." Down. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was the richest woman in the world, and only the man beside her knew she existed. 8 months had passed since the sky over the Calumet River turned orange. In the quiet cobblestone streets of Varenna, overlooking the deep blue expanse of Lake Como, the name Dante Moretti was never whispered. Here, he was simply Signor Rossi, a man who spent his mornings restoring an old wooden motorboat and his evenings watching the sunset with the woman the locals called the Golden American. Sienna Hayes adjusted the lace curtain of their small villa. The Chicago winter was a lifetime away. The FBI had dismantled the Moretti and Valenti empires with the data she had leaked, leading to the largest organized crime bust in Illinois history. Lorenzo Moretti was serving a life sentence in ADX Florence, and the world believed the Great Wolf had perished in the shipyard explosion, but secrets have a way of traveling across oceans. Sienna turned as Dante entered the room, his white linen shirt open at the collar. He looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened by the Mediterranean sun, though his eyes never stopped scanning the perimeter. He walked to her, sliding his arms around her waist. "You're thinking about it again," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her neck. "The Zurich account," she admitted. $32 million, Dante. It's sitting there, untouched. My father's blood money." "It's not blood money anymore, Sienna," Dante said, turning her to face him. "It's a ghost's inheritance. We use it to build the schools in Palermo like we planned. We use it to make sure no other girl has to work double shifts just to hide from her own name." The moment was shattered by a soft, rhythmic tapping at the heavy oak front door. 3 short beats, 1 long. Dante went still. That wasn't the knock of a neighbor. That was a signal from the old world. He reached into the waistband of his trousers, pulling a suppressed pistol he kept hidden behind a stack of books. He gestured for Sienna to move into the kitchen. Dante opened the door an inch. Standing on the porch, looking remarkably well-rested in a bespoke cream suit, was Thomas Hayes. "The security on this villa is amateurish, Dante," Thomas said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I expected more from the man who supposedly outran the feds." Sienna stepped out from the kitchen, her eyes cold. "How did you find us, Dad?" Thomas looked at his daughter, a flicker of genuine pride in his eyes. "I'm the one who built the accounts, Sienna. Every time you log in to check the balance, it pings a server in Geneva that I own. I didn't come here to kill you. I came to offer you a seat at the table. The Valentis are gone, but a vacuum in Chicago is a dangerous thing. The Genovese family is moving in. They need an architect. They need the Hayes legacy." "I burned the legacy," Sienna said, stepping closer. "I'm not a key anymore. I'm a person." Thomas laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You're a Hayes. You think you can just be a civilian? Look at the man you're with. He's a predator. Eventually he'll miss the hunt. Eventually, you'll miss the power." Dante stepped forward, the barrel of his gun leveled at Thomas's heart. "You're wrong. I spent my life being a wolf because I thought the world was a forest. Sienna showed me it's an ocean. And in the ocean, you don't need to lead a pack. You just need to stay afloat." Thomas sighed, looking at the gun. "If you kill me, the Swiss accounts freeze. The money disappears forever. Is your peace worth $30 million? Sienna looked at Dante, then back at her father. She remembered the night at the Gilded Lily, the clatter of silverware, the fear in the room, and the moment she decided to stop being a ghost. "La ricchezza non è nel portafoglio, Papa," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of the woman she had become. "Wealth is not in the wallet, Father. E nel silenzio di chi non ha più nulla da temer. It is in the silence of those who have nothing left to fear." Sienna walked to the laptop on the side table. With 3 keystrokes, she entered the final command her grandmother had whispered to her on her deathbed. Not a password for money, but a scorched earth protocol. "The money is gone, Dad," Sienna said calmly. "I just donated the entire balance to the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. The Zurich account is empty. The servers in Geneva are currently being wiped. You have nothing to hold over us. You have no bait left." Thomas Hayes stared at the screen, his face turning a ghostly shade of grey. For the first time in his life, the architect had no blueprint. He was just an old man in an expensive suit, standing in a house where he wasn't wanted. "You've ruined us," Thomas whispered. "No," Dante said, opening the door wide. "She saved us. Now walk away. If I ever see your shadow on this coast again, I won't use the gun. I'll use the language my father taught me. And I promise you, you won't like the ending." Thomas Hayes looked at his daughter one last time, seeing the ghost of the wife he had abandoned and the strength of the woman he had underestimated. Without a word, he turned and vanished into the evening mist of Lake Como. Dante closed the door and locked it. He set the gun on the table and exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for 12 years. He looked at Sienna, who was standing by the window, watching the stars begin to reflect on the water. "A waitress and a mob boss," Dante said, walking over to her, starting over with nothing but a boat and a few olive trees. Sienna smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We aren't starting with nothing, Dante. We have the one thing no one in Chicago ever had. What's that? The last word." As the lights of Varenna twinkled in the distance, the silence returned to the villa. But this time, it wasn't the silence of a threat or a secret. It was the silence of a story that had finally found its home. From the dim lights of a Chicago steakhouse to the sun-drenched shores of Italy, Sienna and Dante's journey reminds us that the past only defines you if you let it have the final say. Sienna Hayes went from serving wine to dismantling empires, proving that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone ignores. Their story is over, but the legend of the waitress who silenced the great wolf will live on in the whispers of the underground. Thank you so much for following this 7-part saga. If you enjoyed the twists, the drama, and the romance of the Silence of the Gilded Lily, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more epic storytelling. Share this video with someone who loves a good Mafia mystery. Comment below and let me know. Did Sienna make the right choice by burning the money? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay tuned for the next big story.